Clive Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I stand today, unlike the honourable member for Mid-Beds, not as a conduit of God, but as a heretic, shaking my metaphorical fist at the crumbling edifice of economic orthodoxy. Today's debate title, Achieving Growth, really does beg the question, to what end? Because for more than 70 years, successive governments have preened themselves in the mirror and admired what they saw: growth. That mirror is better known as gross domestic product, and it has become our key metric for judging how beautiful we are as both an economy and a society, one we use to gauge progress and as a proxy for our collective well-being. And yet, the mirror we've been staring into all these years is less of a bathroom variety and more of the fairground, reflecting a distorted image at odds with the reality many of our constituents have confronted over those long decades. Growth, Madam Deputy Speaker, is an illusion, one that is partly responsible for driving three key challenges we now face: rising inequality, the erosion of democracy, and the climate crisis. So let me turn first to inequality. In the past 12 years, we've had GDP growth, albeit sluggish growth, and hence by our main metric of choice, our collective well-being should have increased, even if only incrementally. That's the logic of the message we in this place tell our constituents. You've never had it so good because the economy is growing. And yet by focusing on growth, we all too often evade the hard political questions about distribution. Because if the economic pie is growing, then the proportional size of the slice matters less. But it's still an issue that gnaws away at people's sense of fair play. Back in 2016, during a Brexit debate, a Remain campaigner told his audience, if we leave the EU, GDP will fall. He was, of course, as we've seen, correct. But that's not the point I wish to make. The point is the heckle from the lady in the audience that came back, that's your bloody GDP, not ours. Because she knew that for millions like her, the proceeds of growth were never fairly shared. That when the economy grew, the overwhelming beneficiaries of that growth were the rich and powerful, not her. And even when it was growing, but not fast enough for its main beneficiaries, it was the public services that she relied on that had to be discarded, again, in the name of economic growth. Which leads us on to the second great challenge of this century, defending democracy, not just from external threats, like Russia, but from within. Why? Because if people do not see the reality of their lived experience reflected in the political discourse of their politicians, do not see their reality being discussed in this place, then that gulf is dangerous. Because citizens end up believing they are being deceived. And nothing is more dangerous or destructive to our democracy. We must understand our constituents' buy-in to any political economy depends not just on their absolute wealth, but rather on their relative wealth to those around them. And as has been repeatedly demonstrated, the more unequal a society is, the less satisfied its citizens will be, resulting in political instability, higher crime rates, and higher levels of mental health illness. And we wonder why demand for mental health services is going through the roof in this country. But let's, for the sake of argument, park both democracy and inequality to the side for one moment. And let us ask ourselves this question: how do you square unlimited growth on a finite planet? It's a fair question, but one that never gets a remotely convincing answer. Apparently, it's through increased resource use efficiency and productivity gains. The global economy will, in the next half of this century, triple the number of people to 3 billion who would enjoy Western levels of consumption. That's despite the fact that the 1 billion of us already consuming that much are using 1.6 times more of the planet's resources than is sustainable. You can do the maths. In other words, the growth delusion is a fallacy that will drive climate and ecological destruction and kill us all. Because only in the warped reality of our current growth-obsessed economic model is expansion without end seen as a virtue. In biology, it's called a cancer. Madam Deputy Speaker, Bobby Kennedy knew this truth more than 50 years ago when he made his now famous speech on the limits of GDP growth as a metric for success. He understood GDP is mercenary, blind to morality, indifferent to suffering. GDP growth loves pollution, especially if it has to be cleared up. It relishes crime, especially if more prisons must be built. And it delights in war, especially if countries require rebuilding in the aftermath. That doesn't mean there is no place for GDP as an economic tool. But if we are to successfully face the existential challenges of this century, then we need new political tools for measuring well-being, the health of our democracy, and the ecological and climate cost of our economic activities.